Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 45. I've got 4 replays for you today, 3 from tanks and 1 from warships, and they're all very good games. We're going to limber up, however, with this particular match from Hildebrand in the WZ-132. Now this is Prokhorovka. It's a pretty good map for light tanks, potentially, and it's also an encounter game, so there's likely to be fewer tanks on this side overall, and this flank can actually be fairly important in winning the match, because if you can win the 1-2-3 line, if you can clear this out of enemies, that tree line by the road then gives you a clear shot across to the tracks potentially, and there is some low-lying ground in between, but from that point it is possible to basically win the entire map west of the tracks and potentially even bottle up the enemy team into the northeast corner. Now, depending on how many there are left at that point, you then might be faced with the concentrated firepower of quite a lot of tanks in a relatively small area, but we're nowhere near any of these scenarios yet. For the moment, he's just using the bushes for cover and trying to spot for his teammates and getting shot, because as it turns out he doesn't have 6th sense on this commander, which for a light tank commander is not great, but I've got more than a few light tanks myself which don't have 6th sense because I just haven't played them very much, and it can take a while to grind out that first crew skill if it's a tank that you don't play very much. Now in this case it might be he started off a new crew, or he's retrained from somewhere else, a crew that doesn't have 6th sense, or I don't even know, but it's going to make life a little bit harder. So it looks like the enemy team really didn't have a lot here. They've driven off that VK 3002D, so that's a pretty good sign that he doesn't have a lot of friends in the vicinity, otherwise he would likely not be running away like that. As it is, he's gone to the 4 line. He's using those ridges that they have on either side of the central ridge to basically, you know, shield himself where possible, to peek up to do some damage and spot for as yet unknown tanks, because there are potentially other tanks back there. Now there's one we definitely know about, the enemy WZ-132, who must have hit him from pretty much there, because when he got hit previously it seemed like it might have been from the south, but no, he must have been sniped from pretty much across the way in that position. And he's obviously spotted right now, but I mean, taking out that low health 132 could be very, very useful indeed. So he's backed off. He's actually just pinged a shot from a Jagdpanther, so we know he must be, oh, somewhere like A6 maybe, sitting on top of the tracks, or perhaps in the near side dip, or I don't know. It looked like the shot came from over in that kind of direction, so that's a, you know, it's a reasonable assumption under the circumstances. So that's 132 taken out, which is fairly useful. The VK is still doing the rounds here. He's just keeping in motion and trying to spot things. But as you can see, well, the Scorpion's still fairly near Hildebrand, but the IKV and the KB-13 have both worked their way down to fire from a different angle. However, clearly Hildebrand's been spotted again because he's just taken a splash from artillery. Not a huge amount of damage done, but you know, it's enough to make him back off and get behind sufficient bush cover to not be spotted when he's firing. So there's that Jagdpanther. There's a T-150 there as well. They've just lost the KB-13 though, unfortunately, so their vision's going to be limited right now because it's just going to be the IKV, and that won't have a great view range. So that's the Scorpion that gets the killing shot on the VK. We've also just had an E25 on Hildebrand's team drown, which is, I mean, you know, lower in height vehicles can drown on this map, but it's something that you kind of have to go out of your way to do. It's quite hard to accidentally drown yourself on this map, so I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it was over on the other side of the map, so of course we have absolutely no clue. So Hildebrand's moving up himself a bit. He's been playing very cautiously so far. I mean, he's been more wanting to use bushes to sit, to spot, to then get shots off, rather than whiz around actively spotting things. And you can probably do both things in the WZ depending on the circumstances, because it does have a reasonably good turn of speed. It's not quite as whizzy in a straight line as, say, the LTTB, but it's still not bad. So the IKV's been taken out, but the Jagdpanther in firing has revealed himself, and so that lets Hildebrandt just take the killing shot. The T-150 was also killed, and so all that's left now is an ISU-152 who's just died, a T-50, a T-25/2, and the 2 artillery, one of whom he's just spotted. So that's the Hummel down. T-25-2 can only be a limited number of places. Oh, there he is, and unfortunately that shot misses, but we should get a chance for another one before this guy dies, hopefully. And there we go. That's actually slightly lucky, that one, because I think he was auto-aimed at the moment when he fired, and the guy was moving, so I guess the fact he didn't move that far and just a dash of RNG helped him. So there's the final artillery, the Lorraine, and well, maybe he can get a final kill. I mean, it's not going to get him any medals to get a 4th kill, but no 4th kill, but he does get a little bit of spotting damage. So he got a high caliber out of that, only a 2nd class mastery, but all in all that was a very solid game. 2,500 damage done and another 1,100 spotting assistance. So he was clearly much more in a mind frame, a mindset, you know what I mean, of trying to do damage himself, and actually managed to be the top damaging person on the team. It was just narrowly ahead of the Scorpion G there, so that's not a bad performance at all, and it was good matchmaking for this tank. But even so, yeah, that, you know, was quite successful overall. It's maybe, I mean, doing it that way is maybe playing it more like a medium tank than playing for the team and trying to get the spotting damage, but, you know, doing it that way and trying to get your own damage is also just a more reliable way to get experience and credits, of course, because if you're relying on the vagaries of the spotting system to get assistance damage, well, you know, who knows what might happen. So on to the same map again, but this time an older replay and a very different vehicle in very different circumstances. It's the SU-100, it's Prokhorovka, but it's a regular Prokhorovka match. And this is not good matchmaking, especially. It's not horrible in terms of the fact that, well, with this gun there are plenty of things on the enemy team he can damage. There aren't actually that many things with armour that might be a problem. The Oni and some of the hull down American heavies, but otherwise, considering this is a tier 8 game, you know, it's not like there's lots of IS-3s and IS-6s that Redman's going to be dealing with. So the fact that he's got the 175 pen 122mm gun, given the enemies he's facing, actually this is quite good. He can do things here, potentially. But still, this is very bottom tier matchmaking for himself and his platoon mate in the Jagdpanzer IV. So a couple of good solid hits so far. Nothing spectacular, but I mean, you know, he's got plenty of tanks ahead of him, and he's having to play rather a passive role here, and partly it's because he's bottom tier, but also, you know, he's in a tank destroyer that doesn't exactly have a lot of armour. So those two things together, I mean, this is not exactly going to be high octane gameplay for a lot of it, but if you were going for high octane gameplay in this particular scenario, you'd probably just get yourself killed really quickly, because you're an SU-100 in a tier 8 match. And there are plenty of guns around that could end him quite quickly. He's only got 560 hit points. So they're steadily pressing up. I mean, it's the same flank again, it's the 1-2-3 line. This can be quite an important flank to win. But the hill equally is quite important. And as you can see, well, the enemy team, yeah, they do seem to have the advantage there. Them pushing up this line is coming at the cost of them not really having enough tanks on the other side. So they've got, I think, what, two tanks on the two flanks. Tanks, flanks, practically the same word. And the context is, you know, practically the same. Anyway, looks like there's two vehicles on the 0 line, and the enemy team are, you know, contesting the hill, and they're not really particularly being hugely pressured, it seems like. I think they've lost a couple of vehicles over there, but it's been quite an even trade so far, so who knows how it's going to go. So they've been really whittled down, but it looks like they've also really whittled down this flank. It's just that T-25-2 left. And unfortunately, Redman's got to spot for himself, but he does have binoculars, and I'm not sure about his crew's vision range, but maybe quite a good crew on this, I'm not sure. So he is managing to fire and not get spotted, so potentially the, even though he's not in bush cover, potentially the T25-2 did not have a particularly good view range. So there might still be something up here. I mean, I think he's probably being especially cautious of the E25, who just hasn't been spotted yet. There was also a Bert that was on this flank, but the Bert's probably hightailed it. And of course, you know, he's got to give his T28 prototype ally time to catch up, because this is, I think this was 913, so this was before the buff to the prototype's speed. So it was a rather slower beast back then. So he's trying to spot once again. Something does get spotted, but it will have been his allies on the centre ridge there that picked up this FCM. So, you know, if you can hit this guy, it's almost guaranteed damage, but the aim time on the 122 is not the snappiest. However, there's the E25. That's a very good one to take out, and it takes a big 1-2 hit, leaving him on not a lot of health, so he's going to be a lot more cautious. Artillery's also taken out the FCM, leaving the middle clear, but there's still an Oni on the hill. The E25 is still alive, it's very fast and very sneaky, and there's still 3 artillery. And it's pretty much even, you know, they've got 2 RTs and 1 more tank on their own side, so they can't really afford to lose anybody at this stage. They can't really afford to be too gung-ho. We do, however, at least know that E25 is very low health. The Oni, if he's been spotted, maybe he took some RT damage, maybe he took some damage from the middle. We don't know. We really don't know at this stage. It just remains to, you know, be seen if and when they get spotted. So Redman has decided to move back down the flank under the cover of the tree line. It's around about this point that the Bert pops up on the other side of the tracks and proxy spots their own artillery. Now this thing's got a good enough tone of speed that it doesn't take him all that long to get back up here, because he's clearly got in mind that he's maybe going to try and help artillery and defend the cap. But it's too late to save 1 artillery, and the other one is actually about to die as well. The Centurion, by the way, doesn't seem to have moved that much in the last, what, minute and a bit? So, you know, in the time that Redman has come all the way down the 2 line pretty much to come back and help defend the cap, the Centurion's just been kind of milling around in the middle there. So the other artillery is dead, and at this point the Bert makes his move straight into the sight line of Redman, because of course the guy had no idea he was there. The T25, the E25 rather, also gets spotted in the same place, but the Centurion's in a position to take him out, and that now just leaves an M44 and the Oni, because I think the Prot took out, the Prot must have taken out at least the other artillery, the Lorraine artillery, who was presumably over on the little island somewhere. I didn't quite catch that. It's one of those times when there's enough going on that it's quite difficult sometimes to pay attention to everything that's going on at once. So the Oni, I mean, he hasn't been seen in a while. The mystery is how many hit points does he have left, but at this point, I mean, it's 4 versus 2. And even if this Centurion isn't the best player, I mean, 4 versus 2, surely they can take this guy. They are a bit split up, though. But as it's going to turn out, it doesn't really matter, because the Oni has taken a hit from somebody getting spotted across the tracks. I think it must have been the Prot, unless the KV-3 managed to get a hit into his side. And, well, if Redman gets lucky, and he does, you can take the guy out. And that was just an AP shell as well. I'm not exactly sure where that would have penned on the front armour, but that felt like it was quite a lucky shot. So the M44, meanwhile, has been spotted. He was on the hill. Redman lines up with the final shot and takes out another artillery. 1 shy of a top gun, but, however, it was a high caliber and his second gun mark on the Su-100, all while being very, very bottom tier. So that's not too shabby. And as he said in the replay, the page title himself, when this gun works, it really works. And there you go, 3,900, nearly 4,000 damage done with just over 1,000 base XP, better than the next best player on his team, which was actually one of the artillery. So that was a really good effort in the Su-100, and it just goes to show that if you're bottom tier, having a big gun helps. It really does. It's not like being bottom tier in some of the, say, British tank destroyers or some of the other lines where, yeah, you're a tank destroyer and you might be sneaky, but you don't really have either a lot of penetration or a lot of damage and the SU-100 just has enough of both. So on to the final tanks replay, and we have King Trigon here in the pancake tank, the Object 416. This time being very top tier and on a different map. Now this has got, I think, the 107mm gun. From what I understand, from my vague memory of looking up this tank at various times in the past, the gun handling isn't great, but it's got pretty good alpha damage for a medium tank. It's what, I think 300 average per shell? Well, we'll soon see. I think, well, it must be, because he's managed a one hit so far for 342. So yeah, it's 300, because it's the same gun that the KV-5 gets, I believe. So you know, it's very flat. It's a sneaky tank. It's reasonably mobile. It's actually fairly bouncy under circumstances like these, and it's just the fact that, you know, it doesn't have the best penetration and it doesn't have the best gun handling that's kind of going against him. So this is quite a steep matchmaking match in some ways. There's a big chunk of tier 6s, like 2 tier 7s per team, or in fact I think their own team's only got 1 tier 7. No, they had 2 tier 7s. Yes, they had an IS as well, and then tier 8s at the top. So potentially very good for being top tier, and you can't get matchmaking quite like this anymore, I don't think. It's a bit more even these days. It's a bit more predictable. This team, however, is being a little unpredictable in that they're all managing to die on the flank of the hill well, not somehow. I mean, you know, the enemy team got up there en masse first. Their own top tier, well-armoured heavy tank, the IS-3, is all the way over in A7 for some reason. I don't quite know why they went over there. And so what they did have on the hill has been pretty much overwhelmed, and Trigon's plan of just putting in flank fire is, I mean, he's not got great shots. He's had some shots from here. He's already done 1,000 damage, but yeah, he's not going to be able to save his teammates because they're just being overwhelmed by superior forces. So yeah, this is not looking good. Half the team's dead. The IS-3 is alone and isolated. There's a T-44 and a Panther way over on the west flank, and over on this side it's himself and an AMX-12T. So it's really not looking good. So he chooses even at this moment to reposition. Don't think he's been spotted at any point yet, but with all these tanks potentially coming down, he might get spotted. Although, having said that, you know, it's not like the enemy team hasn't lost some tanks themselves, but crucially, you know, of the top tiers, it's himself and another medium on this side, and the enemy team's got an Emil and a WZ-111, although the WZ is quite low health. So he's trying to get a shot on the WZ, but it doesn't matter. He's spotted him for the artillery, and that's been enough. The other tanks, it looks like they turned to go for that IS-3, and then they've basically lost spotting at this point. The Churchill 7's been spotted for the first time, so he's, you know, we know where he is. He's not really a big threat in the scheme of things. This is pretty terrible matchmaking for him. But maybe more crucially, the enemy team's down 1 artillery thanks to the T-44 spotting, and they also know where that T-54 Bold 1 and the Emil are, because they were, I don't think, up on the hill previously. I think they must have stuck around the church area. So, of all the tanks that could have come down on this side, it was just the Cromwell. And the 12T and the T-44, well, they're not going to last too much longer over there, but they've not been doing nothing. You know, the 12T's got 2 kills, the T-44's got 1 kill. So, although King Trigon is going to have a very good result out of this, you know, there was a bit of team effort in this. It's going to be one of those games where it gets to a certain point and then it becomes a case of somebody pulling out all the stops to get the job done. But if there'd been just a few more enemy tanks left, getting that job done would have been so much harder, which is maybe kind of spoiling how this one's going to go. But it's going to be a good match, I can assure you of that. So he's relying somewhat on the 12T's vision, but the 12T is, I mean, they're going to know he is around there. so he's maybe understandably a little reluctant to pop out, because he's an easy one-shot for those two remaining enemy tanks. Of course, there's an artillery left as well. But he's come up. He's having a little nose forward, and Trigon himself is doing his best to support this guy and also remain unspotted whilst doing so. He's also, you'll note, running a little low on AP. He's got a fair bit of heat ammo. I guess that's because this, as I've said, it's not a particularly high pen gun. It's 167 average with the AP, if it's the gun I'm thinking of. But the heat, I couldn't tell you what that has, because of course the KV5 has APCR rather than heat. But I'm going to guess it's, you know, above 200, because the 167 base pen, I mean, when you're top tier, it's not too bad, but of course this doesn't have limited matchmaking, and even though it's a medium tank, which means you can kind of get away with having a bit less pen, for those situations where you meet the better armoured tanks, the 167 is just not going to be enough. So unfortunately the 12T dies, and then it turns out the 54 Mod 1 has actually gone south across the field, so they're down on artillery, and they're probably fairly soon going to lose whatever it is that's all the way down in K0. So Trigon's taking the fairly cautious approach here, because the Emil is an auto-loader, of course, and oh, as it turns out, we now know where that AMX-13 artillery is as well. It's down there with the T-54. So the Emil's taken out the last artillery. The SU was basically a bit stuffed because he had tanks from either side. And so now Trigon is left alone, 1 versus 3. And this is the part where if there'd been 1 or 2 more tanks left alive, it would be looking pretty dicey. But as it is, 1 versus 3 seems doable. That Emil does have a fair bit of health left though, so he's got to be careful here. And he's also got a good enough gun that although Trigon's armour is bouncy just due to his low profile, it's not something you'd particularly want to rely on. Now, I don't know what equipment he's got, obviously not binoculars, so he's had to go forward a little bit to spot, but he's trying to stay covered as much as possible, so I don't think the Emil's actually seen him yet. And the heat is doing its job. And this is the kind of situation where you would reach for the premium ammo, because this is crunch time. This is back against the wall, it all comes down to this. And so you absolutely want every single shell to count. So there's one from the Emil, it bounces. There's the second, which does not, and tracks him. Ooh, there we go, one more can finish him off, but he's also taking fire from artillery and the 54 Mod 1. And as this is a slightly old replay, he's having used his repair kit already, you know, that was it. He didn't have it available again, so he had to wait for the track to repair. Now, as the Emil was not, you know, spotting him any longer as he was dead, the 54 Mod 1 to then nail him at that point would have had to take a guess. But as it was, fortunately he got away with his life. It's a close thing though. If you hadn't had that many hit points, you know, he wouldn't have had to have that much less to have been dead, potentially. And it's a good thing that Emil's first shot bounced as well. So there's the 416's armour actually coming in very, very useful. So one of them is in the cap. We don't know who. But my money would be on artillery, and oh no, as it turns out, it's the 54 Mod 1. Now my money would have been on artillery being in the cap, just because, you know, if they were playing together and coordinating, the artillery could be in there as the bait, and then the 54 Mod 1 could be, you know, providing cover, essentially. But as it was, it's the Mod 1 who's in the cap, and now he's been reset. So there's no danger imminently of capping happening, but there wasn't really an imminent danger of it anyway, because it's an encounter game and you can't cap that quickly, especially not with only one tank. So potentially this guy could cap still in the remaining time. There's 3 minutes left, but it would be a pretty close run thing. And so knowing that there's a bit of time to work with, not a huge amount, but a bit, Trigon actually spends some of that time trying to find that artillery. As you can see, it's taken about a minute and a bit to poke around in that corner and then drive back to a position where he can hit the cap from. So we've established the artillery is not there, but I mean it would have been a pretty good guess that the artillery would have moved from the last spotted position anyway. You wouldn't necessarily hang around where you were last spotted if you knew you had been, and you knew that there was an enemy medium tank roaming around looking for you. So, you know, that could be maybe thought of as being a misplay in terms of there not being that much time left, but as it is, it's hopefully not going to matter, but we'll see. So he's picked up the mod 1 and gotten another hit. Tries a blind shot, but no, he's going to have to acquire him again visually. But during all this, he hasn't been spotted. And so this time, well, there's the artillery, who's very neatly revealed himself. So he gets the shot, gets spotted, and at this point the mod 1 knows exactly where he is, and the mod 1 has to come and kill him to win this, because there's 45 seconds and counting. So still the heat loaded and into the turret, and it does the job, and that's where his low profile probably came in very useful as well. So all of that and only a first class. He did, however, get a high caliber and a defender with 4,387 damage done, and quite a good game, but no profit though. No profit because, of course, he fired quite a lot of premium in the latter part of that game. But of his team, you know, there were people making the kills, but he was doing quite a lot of the damage. So you look at the proportion of the damage he did versus anyone else. The next best was, what, 1,500, 1,600-ish? So, yeah, over 4,000, nearly 4,400 done. I think you could say that was a carry. I think you could very, very fairly say that was a carry. Lastly, we come to Warships, and it's a ranked game courtesy of AndyCX. Now this time round it is tier 6 for ranked, and that's been quite nice actually. There's a nice variety of ships at tier 6, and unlike tier 7 where there are one or two ships, notably premium ships, that are problematic, and that's definitely true for tier 9 as well, but maybe not so much tier 8. Tier 8's not too bad, but tier 6 just feels quite nicely well rounded. Now the Warspite itself was the first British battleship in the game, if you don't count the likes of the Congo, and it's not the toughest battleship, but it's got very good accuracy on its guns, and since the buff to the turret rotation, it's a lot more comfortable to play. And that accuracy, combined with the fact that it can heal quite a bit of its health back, makes it not a bad choice for ranked. It doesn't have great AA, it's not that fast, but it can be a real bruiser in the right circumstances. So he's in with two other battleships, two cruisers, a destroyer, and somewhat unusually a carrier, because there haven't been a big number of carriers in ranked, at least not in the battles I played. I think there were only 2 or 3 matches where there were carrier players. So generally speaking, if somebody's feeling confident enough to take a carrier into a ranked game, chances are they're at least a decent carrier player, but it's always possible for someone to be completely overconfident of their carrier skills. But for now, the carrier isn't particularly committing, so Andy doesn't have to worry too much, and he is also near other ships. It's not like the AA on this thing's terrible. There are tier 6 battleships with a worse AA rating. I think the Dunkirk might be the worst, or possibly it's the Mutsu. It'll be one of the premium ones anyway. But of a much more immediate threat is the fact that now there are a bunch of people shooting at it. And this thing, I mean, it's been joked in the past that it basically starts the match on fire. But it's kind of true, you know, it does sometimes feel like your deck timbers are pre-soaked in gasoline. So he's just obliterated that Cleveland, but he's also lost quite a lot of health in one go. I don't think that was actually a Citadel, but it was certainly a number of regular penetrations from another battleship. So that was, what, 12k you lost all at once, which even for a battleship, that's a fairly significant chunk, especially at tier 6 is a fairly significant chunk of your health. He's just letting the fire burn, however. I mean, it's eating up some of his heal, but he knows that just extinguishing one fire is not that smart of an idea. It's generally better, unless you know that one fire is going to kill you, to just let it burn out and heal back the health, especially when you've got the Warspite heal, because you never know, a torpedo might appear out of nowhere, or the carrier might come for you with torpedo bombers, and then suddenly you're flooding when you need your heal the most, or need your repair the most, and at that point you're in real trouble. So they've traded a cruiser each so far. Andy's pulled back a little bit, and that's part of the essence of ranked, really, in that it's good to kind of rotate people around. It's good to let different people take the focus at different times, because you don't want one person taking all of the focus and then dying, and then the next person taking all of the focus and then dying, and meanwhile the enemy team might be switching it around so that nobody can get focused all at once. But of course, the difference between ranked and team battles is that there's no coordination going, so you just have to hope that people will step up to the plate and get themselves on the forefront of the action, so that you've got a little bit of time to withdraw and repair, because there's every chance that the team might just sit there and let you get obliterated. That can happen. In a team game, of course, and I can't even remember, when did we last have a season of team battles in Warships? I'm sure it's been like a couple of seasons of ranked in a row and no team games for a while. But in team games, you can actually talk to the people, hopefully, and coordinate and try and, you know, work these things out and get people where you need them. But as part of the frustration of ranked, I think probably the most frustrating part of ranked is seeing teammates going off and doing silly things. But sometimes it isn't even that you're doing silly things, it's just that you maybe get a bit unlucky, and that can be especially true for cruisers. I mean, that Cleveland got fairly well obliterated earlier on. They look fairly close to losing one of their own cruisers, and in fact that Shinonome is in bad shape as well. But then you get things like what's about to happen to this Molotov. And yes, he was sailing broadside, and yes, you don't particularly want to do that when a Warspite's shooting at you, but even so, that was rather unlucky. But that's also maybe why you play the Warspite, because you can make shots like those. So they're a ship down at this point, but all is not lost, and a lot depends on, well, who does what, who goes where. Now, there is a Fuso on their team that, in contrast to what I've been saying about people sharing the pain, this Fuso has just been kind of hanging back the entire time. So this is maybe not somebody that's going to be the most valuable as a team player. But the enemy team, I mean, they're getting a bit scattered. They've got a Bayern that's kind of pressing down the 2-3 line, and just looking at this, it doesn't look great what they are doing right now. But the enemy team is also maybe a bit scattered, and Andy, I mean, he's not, like, he's reasonably close to the Fuso, but it's not like he's rushing down there with the Bayern, but he's still doing his best to put in effective fire. And there is one advantage for this, from this kind of situation, in that, you know, the Bayern potentially could be getting picked on a lot right now, but the enemy team's also having to split their fire and split the directions of fire. And there we go, nice big hit into that enemy Warspite, over 15,000 damage done, so that's not bad. That's already enough to get him a high caliber. So that enemy Warspite's in serious trouble. He's got actually the Ryujo going for him. The new mechs and the Bayern that are left alive on the enemy team, they're hanging back rather. But it's at this point the enemy carrier decides that he's off on his own. The enemy carrier is fairly beat up himself at this point, but still alive. And so maybe he figures the Warspite's not too tricky a target. But fortunately, the allied Ryujo has fighters close enough to actually try and help out. And it looks like he strafed those dive bombers away, and he's now locking the torp bomber. So this is going to be a panicked drop, but it's still going to be maybe two, in fact 3 hits. Fortunately, it's not that damaging, and also Andy still has some heals left, but still that's going to count as heavy damage, and so it's all kind of whittling away the available health pool that he can get back. So the enemy Warspite goes down to the Bayern, who is now further away from the enemy than the carrier is. Hopefully that Ryujo's not taking too much fire right now, but it looks like at least the destroyer's firing at him. Andy, meanwhile, having dealt with that air attack, or survived that air attack with the able assistance of his carrier, is looking to once again position himself to actually do some damage. And his current location isn't great for that. I mean, he does manage that hit against the new mechs, which disables the gun, but he's going to have to get a bit closer. So, good news, they've stabilized the numbers, and they're actually, you know, they're in an okay position-ish, but that could change quickly. I mean, if Andy just gets obliterated, the Fuzo's been very standoffish and just unwilling to get his hair mussed up. The Bayern's all the way over on the other flank, and although the carrier is obviously making the enemy destroyer a priority, that means that Andy or this Fuzo or whoever the enemy carrier goes for with his planes is probably, you know, he's going to have a fair run at it. But it looks like, you know, he's not got a lot of that dive bomber squadron left, so maybe that independence is starting to run out of planes. So it's mostly Andy dueling with this Bayern at the moment, and the Bayern and the new mechs both actually have a reasonable amount of health left. And Andy himself, well, he's still able to heal up to about halfway, and this is one of the advantages of the Warspite. Any other battleship would be on considerably lower health right now. But in a fight with a Bayern, the Bayern's armour is unquestionably better. So it's a question of the better armour versus the better guns, because the Bayern's pen isn't that good, and of course it's German battleship accuracy, so it's also not that good. So a nice broadside hit into the Bayern, but he's very broadside himself, and I think he's a bit indecisive about which way to turn right now, because there's a couple of islands. Well, there's an island right in front of him, there's an island slightly to his north, and maybe he's reluctant to actually turn in the direction that would get him closer, but rather than risk running aground, yeah, I think if he wanted to turn away and get a bit more distance, I think he left it a little bit late to decide that. So he's awkwardly broadside right now. He really wants to start turning more towards this Bayern, because if the Bayern lands a hit with those 15-inch guns, it's going to hurt. So it's taking a bit of damage, but it's not, I mean, you know, this is not too bad. This is all kind of okay at the moment, and they've actually got the Bayern coming round, their own Bayern, and hopefully putting some firing from the south. And the Fuzo, well, the Fuzo might be in position to fire at somebody somewhere at some point. Now Andy's, despite the closeness of this Bayern, actually immediately switched to the Farragut. But I'd have kept my guns on the Bayern at that point, because the Farragut's not an immediate threat. The Farragut can't stealth drop, and he's also just come out of a smoke, so his smoke's going to be on cooldown. So I'd have sent those shots in the direction of the Bayern instead, because this guy's a priority right now, especially as the new mechs has come round the corner slightly to the east, and now has shots on the side of Andy's ship. So he clearly doesn't want to get too close to avoid the possibility of ramming. But this might cost him in terms of health, and actually that's a nasty hit from the Bayern just with that one gun. For some reason though, that new mech salvo that came in then from the west, from the east rather, was HE. I'm not sure why that was an HE salvo, but that's kind of works in his favour. And I think their own Fuzo was also firing HE, and I'm not entirely sure why. It might have been he decided that the Bayern was at such an angle that the AP wouldn't do that well. So that new mech has got a lot of health, but this is not bad. I think they've pretty much broken the back of the enemy team. The Farragut doesn't have a lot of hit points. The enemy carrier must be almost deplaned at this point. We haven't seen any planes in a little while, and their own Ryujo is, you know, he still has strike aircraft, and he's still in a position where he can be a threat to the enemy team, which is this is maybe, having said what I said about carriers earlier, if you see someone in an independence in a ranked game, the independence is not great for ranked. It's really not great, just because of its loadouts and the fact that the Ryujo gets to have more plane squads that it can divvy up to do various things, even though the independence of course has bigger plane squads. So Andy's keeping a sharp eye on that Farragut. He doesn't want to get jumped from behind an island. The Warspite, of course, does have a very good turning circle. This is one of the very nice things about this ship. And So if the Farragut does try anything, there's a decent chance that Andy can dodge out of the way, unless the Farragut basically drives up to point blank range. But for now, he's not worrying too much about it, clearly. So the new mechs and the Fuso are knocking, you know, bits off each other. That Fuso is still awfully healthy. I mean, this is the kind of battleship player that is quite frustrating to see sometimes in ranked games. I might be making generalizations here. I don't know, maybe this Fuso is a really good player. But judging by his behaviour from a lot of this, he's been unwilling to really get into the fight. And if you're ending a ranked game with that much health left in a battleship, then it means you've been a bit on the shy side. And you can't afford to do that in a ranked game. You have to use your hit points and abuse those hit points and get in and, you know, take the hits so your cruisers don't have to, potentially. So they won that one before they could find the cruiser. They won that one on points, as you can see. And Andy had a pretty damn respectable score out of that, 137,000 damage done, with 2,000 base XP. And unsurprisingly, the Ryujo in second place, 35 air kills. That must be a fair bit of the... in fact, there were only two other people that had air kills, so he had the majority of the enemy carrier's planes, it must have been. And... so, yeah, between the two of them, they did very well. You know, a well-played carrier can be an absolute asset in a ranked game. As for the rest of his teammates, I mean, some of them did okay. But, you know, some of them maybe less so than others. And considering how long some of them were alive, the scores were maybe a little disappointing. But I think it takes a certain amount of bravery. I mean, I'm kind of looking at the cruisers when I say that, but it takes a certain amount of bravery to take a cruiser into a ranked game, just given how easily you can get completely splatted if it you know, happens that a battleship points their guns at you, which battleships like to do because they know they can easily splat you. Anyway, so that was a pretty good ranked game. It was certainly not textbook. It's not like everybody was sticking together and focusing fire, but it worked out in the end. And the main thing with ranked is getting the wins. But, you know, if you can get the people that are with you to act in some kind of team-like manner as well, that's always a bonus. So that's it for this Patreon supporter spotlight video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.